Hi guys. So I was asked, or we were asked to do a monologue based off of the thing that I wrote, or the monologue of the grant or someone who moved. Personally, I don't think that's appropriate for me to do because what I wrote didn't really make sense, and also it was kind of like I didn't take it too seriously, which is on my part bad but that primarily was because I don't really know when my grandparents came over here, or my great great grandparents came over here to the United States, because I really don't have any connection to Italy with the exception of my last name. So because of that, I don't think it is appropriate for me to talk on their behalf or even create a monologue that could ever insult them. So instead, I will tell you a few stories that I have been told about my relatives. Most of these will revolve around my grandfather on my dad's side. His name is Joe, my dad's name is Joe, and my brother's name is Joe. So that's three Joes. I, fortunately, do not have that name, so I don't have to deal with the Joe the Fourth. Anyways, my grandfather was in World War II. He was in a tank regiment, yeah. So, and he served under General Patton. And if any of you know who Patton is, he was one of the greatest generals of all time and really knew what he was doing in World War II. My grandfather got to meet Patton, but not exactly in the way that one might normally meet them. So apparently the way the story goes is that my grandfather, it was a very stormy day, it was like really shitty, and there was like mud everywhere, but it was foggy, so you couldn't see shit at all, whatsoever. Now Patton, who was the general at the time, was telling people where to put the tanks, where to go, and so forth, and I think this was like a resource drop-off or something like that. The protocol is if you don't know who's giving you the orders, you don't do them because you don't know if it's the enemy, you don't trust them, you know. So my grandfather, who's driving the tank, Patton gets on his tank and tells my grandfather to go somewhere, and my grandfather, because he couldn't see him and didn't know who he was like, "Why don't you go fuck yourself?" Now later on, my grandfather found out it was Patton, and boy was he terrified. And in that instance, Patton, I don't know exactly what happened after that, but I thought that was kind of funny and an interesting way to meet someone as legendary as him. Now, my grandmother was also helped in the military because she, during World War II, like everyone else, were in the aid to help the country. My grandmother, on both sides, were in factories building ammunition, plane parts, sewing uniforms, you name it, she made it. And I think that kind of okay, well, they weren't first generation immigrants like I think their parents were, but to go from immigrated families and immediately go into the war effort after that is an incredibly interesting story, because they made this place their home almost immediately. Just like this is my home, it was also theirs. And I guess that makes sense, but I guess I thought it was more amazing than I guess it actually is. But regardless, that to me is a real story to be told. So I apologize for not having a monologue about my ancestors and them moving, because I don't, and I don't think it's right to make one, especially because I don't want to tell the wrong story or tell a story that I shouldn't tell. But I hope this is sufficient, and to me personally, I think it's incredibly interesting to know. And yeah. Thanks.